Today, we remember NASCAR champion Greg Biffle, his beloved wife, and their children, tragically lost in the Statesville plane crash. On December 18, 2025, a Cessna Citation 2 registered to GB Aviation Leasing crashed while attempting to return to Statesville Regional Airport. Greg Biffle and his family were on board. Our thoughts are with their loved ones, friends, and the motorsport community, who mourn the loss of a champion and a family cherished by many. Greg Biffle was remembered not only for his victories on the track, but for his compassion. During Hurricane Helene in 2024, he flew his helicopter into remote mountain communities, delivering life-saving supplies to families in need. His thoughtfulness and courage brought hope when it was needed most. In moments like these, we are reminded of the fragility of life and the strength of community. May Greg, his family, and all those lost rest in peace, and may their loved ones find comfort in the days ahead.
To help us with this breaking news. So, Brad, I'm curious, what did you first find out, and what was your first jump? Because you were one of the first people to help us figure out this flight-aware situation and how this was connected.
Yeah, so initially, like most people, I started getting tagged in a bunch of crash footage from the Statesville airport, and it looked pretty fiery. And, knowing the Statesville airport, I knew it had to be a pretty significant plane because it wasn't a smaller prop plane. It was definitely a jet aircraft of some kind, because that's definitely jet fuel that I saw burning. So I immediately started looking at the flight data, which is all public, and I could see that the plane took off and circled back and came back to the airport, which tells you just on that sense that they had some kind of mechanical issue of some kind, because if it was something on the takeoff or landing, you could be anything, right? But the fact that they took off and immediately circled back to the airport told me they probably were having some kind of trouble. And the one thing about the airport too, the runway goes kind of like west-east. They took off going west. If there was an emergency declared, they could have came back and landed right back that opposite direction, right? They actually were circling all the way back, coming in the normal approach, which means they had some control over the plane. They were actually able to fly it. But then as it came in, you're seeing the flight aware data that I pulled up. I'm actually going to pull it up here in a minute. You could see that even though the debris is on the runway, Julie, it didn't really make it to the runway. There's a debris path through the golf course, and it looks like they clipped some trees, maybe a fence or something, and then that's where the plane ended up, which tells you they were losing power. And so all the reports that I heard from the radio traffic was they reported engine trouble. So there's 2 engines on this aircraft. It is certified to fly with just one, but it's a lot harder. Obviously, you need power. The thing about airplanes, you need to force air over the wing to create lift, and there's 2 ways to do that. The engine's forcing it forward, or if you're at altitude, you can actually dive and create lift by pushing air over. It's called gliding, right? But when you're close to the ground, the only thing that creates lift for you is the engine. So the fact that they were close to the ground and had one engine probably contributed to the fact that they didn't have enough power maybe to get all the way to the runway. So that's kind of speculation, but that's just based on the flight data. You can kind of see the flight data they took. And unfortunately, the fiery crash is always the worst kind of crash that you see, because you always worry about people being able to get out of that one. And we know there are at least confirmed fatalities. We don't know who, as you've been doing a great job saying we know who owns the plane, but that doesn't tell you who's on the aircraft. It's like I was telling my friend, I said, I own my car, but my son and my wife drive it. So just because I own it doesn't mean I was in it at the time there's a crash. So you always got to be very careful about who's on the plane versus who owns the plane.
Exactly. And I know that I'm gonna repeat myself probably for the next 3 hours, but I
remember this family right now and anybody else that was on that plane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's why we have so many crews in today answering both of those questions. What's now for remembering the family, and what's next in terms of this investigation? So Nate, thank you for joining us. I know that you've got some work ahead of you today as well.
Sure.
You'll be on at 4, 5, and 6?
I'll be on at 4, 5, and 6. You got it.
All right.
On TV.
Thank you, Nate.
Thank you.
Carlene, what do you want to get to next? I know
Let's
we've
go
got
back.
a lot.
Let's rewind a little bit. Go back to Brad's interview with Krista, an aviation expert. It was really great insight.
Yep. Meteorologist out of Arizona, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah, so he's got a lot of insight, pilot himself, and Brad got a chance to speak with him within the last hour and a half or so.
Yeah, I want to bring in right now from our sister station out in Phoenix. He's a meteorologist as well, but he's a very skilled pilot. He knows a lot about aviation, did instruction. He's very familiar with these planes. Obviously not going to know a lot about this particular crash, but I wanted to bring in Chris Dunn, the chief meteorologist from our Phoenix 12 station. And Chris, thanks for joining us. And I know you know a lot about the Citation 550, and you're a pilot yourself. Could you tell our viewers watching online a little bit about what is going through a pilot's mind when they're taking off and they report engine trouble? What's the process that they would be going through to maybe get back to the airport, or how does that work from a pilot standpoint?
Well, thanks for having me on, Brad. The first process is you want to deal with the emergency, and all pilots, no matter the skill level or the certification level, you're taught to deal with an engine out, whether it's if you have 1 or 2 or 4 engines on the airplane. So you deal with the emergency, and the first rule of any emergency in aviation is fly the airplane. Now, I was looking at some of the observations in that area, and they probably were in the clouds at that point, or maybe not, but pretty close to being in the clouds. So that adds an extra dimension. Not only are you trying to deal with an airplane that may not be functioning properly, but you also have the fact that you can't see outside, which in a normally functioning airplane is perfectly fine. And we're not sure, or at least I have not seen from some of the reports, if they have checked on with air traffic control at that point, because Statesville is a non-tower controlled airport, which is fine. You just do self-announces. But if you're flying IFR or instrument flight rules into the clouds, you are given a release time, you take off, and then you check in with air traffic control. I don't know if they had an opportunity to do just that, but obviously there was some sort of a problem where they took off and they made an immediate left-hand turn coming back to the airport, trying to get back on the ground. So if there was some sort of an engine problem or an engine failure, the first thing you want to do is secure the engine and try to keep the aircraft under control, and then try to get it back down on the ground as quickly as possible.
So if you lose one engine, obviously this plane can fly with one engine. We heard from another expert that it technically could fly with no engines for a while at altitude, obviously. What is the biggest problem with flying with one engine? Let's say one's completely out and you're coming in for landing. What are some of the pitfalls that a pilot might have to deal with as they're coming in for an emergency landing, which this would be, right?
Yeah, certainly it can fly on one engine because it has 2. The biggest challenge, if you will, is something called asymmetrical thrust. So if you think about it, you have 2 engines, and if you lose one, the other one is going to cause it to yaw or shift over to one side. So you have to account for that. And a lot of the multi-engine training, the curriculum, is based on what happens if you do lose an engine, and how are you going to treat that emergency. You need to shut down the one inoperative engine and then be able to control the airplane flying on one engine. So there are a lot of procedures that you have to do, and then flying an instrument approach on a single engine in a multi-engine aircraft, that's a big part of training and the recurrent training as well. So there's a lot of emphasis put into that in the training environment on operating on just one engine in a multi-engine aircraft. So the flight crew, don't know if there was 1 or 2. I believe the Citation 550 is certified for single pilot operations, but a lot of these operators do operate with 2 pilots up front, and that just adds an extra layer of safety. We don't know exactly the nature of the accident and the crash and the situation. And of course, in the coming days, we'll find out more. We'll learn more about exactly what happened. But typically, flight crews at that level are very well trained to handle a situation like that. But as I said, you have layers of different things that are going on at the same time, and that can make it extra difficult to deal with a situation like that.
So, Chris, I mean, they took off. You said it's an untowered airport. With Statesville Airport's pretty small for most airport standards, but a lot of commercial, I would say commercial, but private jets fly out of there because of the NASCAR teams. Would there be a reason for them to go back to that airport or try to go to another airport? The fact that this happened so quickly, was that just the best place to go right after they reported the trouble they had?
Yeah, and if they were, their mindset was, we got to get this on the ground right now. We just left a perfectly good airport right behind us. Let's do a U-turn and get right back down on the ground. If they had everything under control and things were stabilized, they could declare a Mayday and try to get back into Douglas, the big airport with a lot more facilities and a lot more emergency response there. But I think their mindset was, we got to get this on the ground. We got to get it on the ground now. We just left an airport behind us. Let's turn back around and get back down on the ground. Again, I can't put my mind in the minds of the pilots on that airplane, but that would be my first guess as to why they turned back around and tried to get back down to the ground in Statesville.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. One last question before we let you go. I really appreciate you taking this time, and I'm glad you're giving us this input. That we don't know a lot of the information, but from an aircraft standpoint, you're familiar with this aircraft. What can you tell us about this specific aircraft? What is its typical usage, passenger load, those kind of things? What would this aircraft normally be used for?
Yeah, exactly what they were using it for. Executive transport, business aviation, the citation 2, the line, the 525, 550, to be a little more technical. Very popular business jet. This one, I looked up the number. I think it was manufactured in 1981, which is not a big deal. You think a 1981 car, wow, that's really old. But for an aircraft, not so much, because every airplane in the U.S., in order to legally fly, they have to undergo an annual inspection. That doesn't that goes for the airliners, business jets, even the small trainers. Everything has to be inspected annually. And in addition, those inspections are much more in depth on a jet aircraft. And then the insurance requirements are usually pretty high. So you're dealing with a lot of levels and a lot of layers of certification, of the training of the aircraft. Typically, the aircraft, 6 to 8 people on board, and you can do 1,500-mile legs, 2,000-mile legs. So say from Charlotte to New York, that's an easy hop. Charlotte to Miami, Florida. My understanding was this was heading down to Florida and then out to the Bahamas. A pretty common mission for this aircraft. So they are used for personal transport, for business transportation, and Statesville is perfectly fine to use that airport. 7,000-foot runway, plenty of runway length, and they're just outside of the busy, what's called the Class Bravo airspace in Charlotte, which is a highly restricted zone of airspace. So they can take off and they can land. They don't have to even talk to anybody in air traffic control unless they're flying into the clouds and on an IFR flight plan, which they most likely were, and aircraft like this typically are. So once they get in the clouds and they check in with Charlotte Approach, and then they're handed off to Washington, D.C. Center or Jacksonville Center or something like that. And so the different layers of air traffic control will handle them. But again, it's really early in the process, and we're trying to just look at some of the details and pick apart what went on. And I'm sure a lot of those questions will be answered in the coming days. And unfortunately, to hear the news that you had in the breaking news at the top of this cut-in, an unfortunate end to this crash.
Yeah, it is, and that really, at the end of the day, is the tragedy of this all, is that we lost lives over this. Chris Dunn, thank you so much for your expertise. Really appreciate that, and thank you so much for checking in. We might hit you up again at some other time.
All right, thanks, Brad.
Really, really helpful interview there with our Brad Panovich and Chris Dunn out of Phoenix, a meteorologist and a pilot himself. But I want to remind you one more time, we got this live picture up still, multiple crews out on the scene. You can still see it's very hazy. Unclear at this point if that is fog or if that is smoke. We're waiting for our meteorologists, especially because they're going to be back so soon.
It appears from what Larry was saying, or there is a foggy conditions up there. So this may be just fog. It might be a little bit of mix of both.
A little bit of both. We know from some of the videos that we've gotten from viewers that it was quite a smoky scene, multiple flames. Carlene's pulling that up now. So yeah, I mean, you can see how something like that would linger.
Black, thick smoke.
Yeah, and I know we keep saying small corporate jet, but of course, it's still a plane. It's a large piece of equipment, and of course, that smoke like that's going to linger for a while. But still, multiple crews on scene right now.
Welcome to the Inner Circle. This isn't just a membership. It's a mission. You're supporting forensic truth, mythic blends, and ceremonial broadcasts that honor every moment. Members unlock exclusive enhancements, behind-the-scenes alerts, and direct access to the pulse of Timescape news and leading sponsor, Gold Rush Fever Specialty Coffee. Join us and help shape the signal. We thank you, and as always, stay safe. That's the latest from Timescape news. We're live. We're watching. We thank you. Subscribe, like, share, and ring the bell so you don't miss what breaks next. Stay with us. We appreciate you, and as always, be safe.